are taught to listen to respond rather than actively listening and being present with someone. And so you're like, well, how am I going to like, and no, you don't always need to respond, you know? And so once you take that defensiveness, because that's what it is, you're listening to give a rebuttal to what they're saying. And when you remove that defensiveness and you're able to just really sit and listen to the other person, one, that is just such a gift for both of you. Um, and then you realize that communication is a lot smoother in that way as well. It's not transactional. It's it's a collaboration, a conversation. you know?
And I think that's what's missing because we talked about it, right? Like we're taught how to talk,
Uh-huh.
say our first words, say mom, dad, so on and so forth. But as you mentioned, to listen to understand, that is so difficult. There was someone, this is a friend, he was asking me a question, and I said two words, and he was already talking. And I told him, I was like, you didn't even wait for my answer. He's like,
Yeah.
well, I know what you're gonna say. So I was like, so let me excuse myself from the conversation. He's
Yeah.
like, no, 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 I want to hear what you have to say. I was like, you don't, because your behavior shows that you
Sure.
actually don't. And one thing that really kind of caught my attention is that he would listen to respond, but he would get angry.
Mhm.
So I told him that's a bit dangerous because and he asked me why, and I said, well, look at it from a woman's perspective. In general, women are weaker than men. They're not built the same way. They're not as big, right?
Right.
So I said, if you're going through a disagreement, it's already emotionally filled, right? And it could be scary for a lot of people. But now someone is asking you questions or you're asking questions and you're just responding and then you're getting upset because of the way you're responding. So how do you
Mhm.
think the women is going to take that? Right? So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that situation?
Yes. Oh my gosh. There's so many ways we can go this. So, my first initial thought is, hold on, it just went away from me. So when we are in that moment where, again, emotions are high, um, you're creating a story for yourself because again, you're preparing yourself to defend yourself. Um, and so one thing that we like to say is, the story I'm telling myself, what I'm hearing and what I'm telling myself is this. And it allows them to hear because we are two separate humans with different experiences in life, which gives us different perspectives. Like, obviously, we're going to see situations differently. And so, and communication styles differ from person to person. And yeah, so if somebody is coming off, defensive, that can be scary for somebody. If they're saying, well, why aren't you answering me? Like, sometimes people really need some extra time to reflect. And so there's like a whole like thing that we can talk about there too about listening, being present. This is the story I'm telling myself. Am I hearing that correctly? Or if somebody is like giving a big share and somebody's like, I'm very overwhelmed right now. I need a moment to pause so I can really reflect on what you just shared and then come back. And so again, communicating that and not just leaving, being like, I'm done with this, like getting exaggerative, right? You can't do that. It's like, whoa, I just need a pause. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I want to give what you shared a lot of thought. And so those are some things that kind of help when you find yourself in those like more heated moments for sure.
What are some of the ways that you'd suggest that people would pause to reflect in those emotions? As we both discussed, emotions are very high,
Hmm.
where some people may be defensive, their guard is up. So, how would we pause and reflect in those moments?
Yeah. So having the conversation before there's even conflict, saying like, hey, I notice when we have conflict or arguments, it always, ends in the same way. We don't get anywhere. And what I would like to try is like having some sort of code word or a signal that we can use, so that way, because I notice I get very overwhelmed in those moments. And so for me, I would like to take a pause. Here's a code word, or here's a symbol that I can do. And that's a sign for the other person to be like, oh, okay, they're not just leaving. Like, because when you're in that moment and you're trying to defend yourself, you're like, no, you're not leaving. Like, we're gonna finish this. Um, you know that they're coming back, and say, like, let's just set 10 minutes, take a breather, go walk outside, do something for yourself, listen to music, whatever you need to do, and then have a time to come back. So plan that ahead of time, because you're not going to remember in the moment. You're going to be, again, very overwhelmed and flustered. Um, and so, yeah, come up with a word that works for you guys. Maybe it's not a word that's, it's maybe it's an inside joke, that because bringing humor into these moments can also be very impactful to de-escalating the situations. And if you do have one person in the relationship where they're trying to crack jokes and you're like, why are you making a joke right now? Like, we're in a serious discussion. That's subconsciously their way of actually trying to bring the relationship back to repair and trying to de-escalate that. Again, just a little perspective shift helps. Um, so yeah, I would just have that conversation before, and then figure out what your code word or symbol will be when those moments come up.
I like the code word idea because it reminds me of some of my female friends when they have a bad date, they say pineapple or they'll
Yeah.
text pineapple. They'll be like, okay, the troops have to send them in, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I like that, it gives everyone an opportunity to say, okay, this is becoming a bit much for whomever is
Mhm.
using it.
Yes.
And let's give ourselves some distance. And ladies and gentlemen, when we say distance, we mean distance from each other, but still in the same space,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because this doesn't mean that Tyrone down the street, you're gonna go over to Tyrone's house and be like, "Well, I'm gonna get all the distance I want." We're not talking. It's not. That's
No,
not code for
no.
something else,
Right, right. No, no.
right?
Just go for a walk around the house. Just go sit outside.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we do that and we give each other some space, we discussed that it has to be like physical space as well. But
Mhm.
I'm thinking it's emotional and mental space too. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And that's why, like, getting outside, being grounded in nature, or listening to music, really helps you to just kind of shift from emotional to, the logical side of your brain, so you can start processing. Um, just any sort of movement that helps you. You could even journal a little bit if you want to. If that's like your go to, you can journal, because, again, it's shifting how your brain is processing, and it allows you to really come back to like a neutral point.
There was an argument that I had with my girlfriend, and we at the time, sorry, we were discussing how we're going to resolve this, and we gave each other some space because we're communicating over the phone. And one thing we did was we planned something together so we can be away from everything else.
Yeah.
And that gave us the opportunity to discuss when we were ready. So we didn't discuss it the first day. We still were at this area. So we rented an Airbnb for a couple of days and we just planned it.
Mhm.
What I really enjoyed about that is that when we decided to have the conversation, we both were ready to have it and there wasn't any outside distractions
Yeah.
on either side.
Yeah.
Like cell phones are a big one, or social media. Like
Mhm.
how many times you probably see where people will argue and you see they're literally on their phone, like, yeah, yeah, I hate
Scrolling.
you, and I don't like that you did this, and they're scrolling. And when you
Yeah.
look at what they're scrolling, it's like, really, this is what you're you're
Yeah,
looking
that's
at
what you're
as
focusing
there's
on.
that's what you're focusing on, right? So is that a commonality that you see that when people are still trying to resolve their issue, there's still those distractions, such as the cell phone, such as the social media, impacting maybe some of the goals that they want to set to lessen the situation from happening again, or even reducing it altogether?
That's a great question. Um, I think the big thing that I see a lot of times is, like, not like you guys did. You set time aside and were very intentional about coming back to this space. And I think, because of life today, things are chaotic and it's really hard to find that time together. And again, we specialize in a lot of like working with couples with kids. And so it's like exhausted. We don't ever have time without the kids. And so like they're having these like half conversations that aren't being fully like, dealt with. And so I think that's what I see a lot is it's not, there are distractions. Um, and it's, yeah, it's about creating the intentionality around that because this is your person and you want to make sure that you're like getting this stuff taken care of because otherwise it just creates fissures in the relationship. And then those cracks in the foundation won't support you any longer, you know?